Okay, so I want to welcome you to the Rent and Mortgage Relief Program webinar. The purpose of today's webinar is to address questions about the tool and the process. We know that you all as grantees have had a challenging time, number one, standing up this program in such a short period of time, and number two, responding to our needs and our requests of changing tools, changing processes, timing. It's been all very challenging for you, and I so apologize to you for that. We knew when the governor announced and requested DHCD to stand up a $50 million statewide program in 3 weeks that it would be challenging, but we recognize the dire need for such a program, and we appreciate you all recognizing the same and stepping up and agreeing to serve as a grantee for the Virginia Rent and Mortgage Relief Program. So next slide, Gabby. While we go through the slides, just a couple of things. One, I want to let you all know that we are recording this session so that there were some people that could not attend and others that can attend but may want to revisit the presentation. You will be getting a copy of the slides after today's session. So the next slide will give you, and for some reason we're not seeing the whole screen, so I know Gabby's going to work on this behind the scenes unless others can see it. There you go. So as I mentioned, the purpose of today's webinar is to clarify RMRP reporting expectations, review the new spreadsheet that you should have received in an email earlier today, and then explanations for each column on the spreadsheet. We know there have been a lot of questions and misunderstandings, so we want to use this as an opportunity to clarify those questions. The agenda for today, I'll be, after this slide, be moving into some formal introductions of our new DHCD Rent and Mortgage Relief Program team and the transition that's occurring now. And then we will be looking at some of the specific changes to the slide, to the report, and looking at the schedule of the submission of the reports, the reporting cycle. We'll go into detail, like I said, reviewing the amended spreadsheet, and then going to focus on commonly made errors or frequently asked questions about the reporting form, as well as about some general items related to administering the Rent and Mortgage Relief Program, because as some people have described this, we have been building this plane as we have flown it, and it's again been very challenging. So before I introduce our teams, I want to introduce myself. I'm Pam Kessner. I serve as Chief Deputy at the Department of Housing and Community Development, and I'm also serving as Acting Deputy Director for the Division of Housing, which is where this program is located. So when we first received the information from the governor about standing up this program, we knew we didn't have time to go through a formal request for proposal process like many grant programs. And we knew that we needed to access an already existing system or network. And so under the leadership of Nichelle Carver and Kendall Clater, we were able to utilize our continuum of care network. And I really want to give a big shout out to Kendall and to Nichelle for stepping up. They added this to their already busy schedules. Many of you already work with Nichelle and Kendall and the team, the homeless and special needs housing team. And for those of you that don't know, they picked this up at the very end of the fiscal year. Many of you were going through the same process they were going through and ending the grants, getting ready for the new fiscal year. It was just really the perfect storm if you look at trying to manage an existing program and standing up a brand new program. So for those of you that don't know the team members for the Homeless and Special Needs Housing Program, I want to introduce them by name and thank them for the work that they've done in order to stand up the rent and mortgage relief program. So under Nichelle and Kendall's leadership, we have Aaron Shoemaker, Taylor Ryan, Will Kerner, Kike Oliver, Ara Mendoza, Andrea Ukrat. Those are our team members that have been in place and working to set up this program to launch it. We have a new team member, though. I did want to give a shout out for those of you that haven't met yet, Rashonda Lanier Jackson, who just recently joined us. So we have another great team member for our homeless and special needs housing program. So again, want to thank those members, and the whole purpose was, like I said, to use an existing system to stand up the program quickly, and then as we brought on new staff to make a transition. So I'm pleased to introduce, and we're going to let Senta and Gabby and Jessica just to say hello. Want to leave them as much time as we can for the webinar, but I want you to be able to see them. So when you talk with them by phone, you can put a face with a name. Senta Gori, she's Associate Director of Eviction Prevention. Gabby Vasquez, the Evictions Vista Program sponsor. Gabby has already been in touch with all of you, I'm sure, related to the biweekly report. And Jessica Gaines, who's our Virginia Management Fellow, who is providing us a lot of research and data collection related to evictions. So just quickly, Senta, Gabby, and Jessica, we'll start with Senta to say hello.
Hi, everyone. I've communicated with many of you via phone or email, and it's a pleasure to be able to put a face with so many names. Thanks for joining us today.
Gabby.
Hi. Like Pam said, I've contacted a lot of you through email, but my name is Gabby, and I'm nice to meet you in this way, this virtual way, and I hope that this can be a very helpful, clarifying webinar.
Thanks, Gabby. And Jessica.
Hello, everybody. Thank you guys so much for everything that you do. I probably have never seen or spoken to any of you, but I do sit behind a computer and looking at message boards, so I know that you're making a difference.
Great, thanks, Jessica. And Gabby's the person behind the scenes today, helping us with the PowerPoint. So thank you, Gabby. So next slide, we're going to now turn things over to Senta, who will take us through the next few slides. Before Senta starts, though, just want to let you know, again, keeping your mute on until time for discussion and questions. If you have questions along the way, put them in the chat box, and that way we'll deal with them at the end, and that will ensure that we get through all of the slides, but also you won't lose your question. So thanks everyone again for being with us. All yours, Senta.
Thank you, Pam. So as stated in the guidelines, you have all agreed to track and report on the activities and some basic household data. As Pam just mentioned, a little later in this webinar, we're going to be walking you through the new spreadsheet that we'll use for reporting going forward. And it includes much of what you see here on the slides around number of persons served, demographics of people served, and the funds dispersed by activity type. Gabby, next slide, please. Oops. Thanks. So this is a bit redundant. You'll see these, the way that we have laid these demographics out in a revised reporting spreadsheet as soon as we get to that part. But this is information that we need all of you to be collecting for every household that you serve. Next slide. So we have added a date of intake. So that will be something that we hope you have been including in your intake forms. If not, we'll need you to start doing that moving forward. The applicant's full name. I'll just mention something about the household unique identifier. I think most of you or all of you have gotten on track with this. This is not a number that is produced on DHCD's side of things. This is something that's unique to your organization, but the most common way of creating a household unique identifier would be the initials of the head of household followed by the date of intake. So if Joe Smith came in on June 1st, that person's household unique identifier might be JS 0601. You all know that folks need to have a valid lease or mortgage. We do allow people to self-certify on their loss of income. And you, of course, all know that households, the rent or mortgage needs to be at or below 100% of fair market rent, and households' income no higher than 80% of AMI. Next slide, please. We do not want grantees or providers to collect anything that is designed to prove an applicant's U.S. citizenship. We have seen that happen in a few instances and just want to be really explicit that we are not requiring households to provide proof of citizenship in this case. Next slide, please. So you all have received this reporting schedule by email. As Pam mentioned, we know we asked you to change course a few times as we have built this plane on takeoff. But your next reporting due date is Thursday, July 3rd, and that should cover the period of July 16th through the 29th. And then you'll see that the reports are due on a bi-weekly basis after that. So we have eliminated that initial monthly report that we asked you for and are just going on a bi-weekly basis now moving forward. Okay, so Gabby, while Gabby pulls up the amended spreadsheet that everyone will be working in now, I just want to thank you all for remaining flexible, echo Pam's statements. The data that we're collecting tells a really important story that will hopefully help us maintain or grow these resources. And I mentioned just by way of example in Friday's webinar, when you see all of this data on our end, it's aggregated and you can begin to see some really interesting trend lines and stories to tell. One example that I mentioned last week is that with the last round of reports, we can see that the majority of people who are benefiting from this assistance are age 8 or younger. So it's just trend lines like that that can help us tell a really compelling story as to why this program needs continued and additional funding. So I'm going to walk through some of the changes that we have made to this spreadsheet. I'll just walk through the spreadsheet as a whole. So you can see that we now have red columns and blue columns. The red column is the red columns indicate that it's a free-form column, so you can enter that in the format that makes sense for you. But when you see the blue columns, and thank you, Gabby. Gabby was just entering an example of the unique household identifier. But in this blue column, you can see now there are drop-down boxes for the city or county of residence for the households that you're serving. So that data becomes really important for reporters who are interested in telling the story in their local community, for delegates who might want to know what things look like for their constituency, and plenty of other reasons as well. And then moving to the right, things are pretty self-explanatory for a little while here. Zip code, number of persons in the household. And then when you get to type of assistance, you'll see there's a drop-down box there, 2 options. Again, pretty self-explanatory there. Household income, and those options are broken out into those AMI brackets that you see on the screen. Ethnicity and race, they both have drop-down boxes. Well, we are trying to operate this program from a race equity lens, and want to be able to make adjustments as we go if we see that we are not reaching people of color who we know are disproportionately impacted by housing instability and the eviction and mortgage crisis. We do have an option, however, and what do we call it, Gabby, under race? Don't know or refused or missing data. So that is self-reported by the household or the applicant. And if they're not comfortable providing it, we of course wanted to leave that option available. But if it's possible to collect it, will be really helpful to us. And then as we move into the application status, I want to make sure that I draw your attention here, because this is an area where we've seen a lot of questions and some confusion. So there are now 3 application statuses to choose from in this drop-down box. What I really want to make clear, I think denied is somewhat self-explanatory, but I'll start from the top. So pending means that you have determined this household to be eligible for RMRP assistance, but you have not yet received all of the documentation in order to move forward with processing a check. So if you were to select pending from this application status drop-down box, there would be, Gabby, if you could just move to the right a tiny bit, the next column here, column K, is the total amount expended. So if someone is in pending status, that would mean that you have not requested that a check be cut on their behalf or processed a check. So there would then be no dollar amount included in the K column, the RMRP extended, total RMRP expended. But when you select approved, which is the second option in the drop-down box, that means that the applicant, that you have either requested a check on behalf of the applicant or cut a check on behalf of the applicant. And in every instance that you select the approved drop-down box from the status column, you must include a dollar amount, a corresponding dollar amount. So there's been a lot of confusion around that. We've seen reports where folks have pending status with dollar amounts or an approved status with no dollar amounts. So we want to make sure that we're all working from the same definition there, and I'm happy to go over that again as we get into questions. And then the third option under application status is denied. We have done away with the waitlist option, which used to be there, but we're no longer prioritizing just folks who are at 50% of AMI or lower. So the denied, and I'll just say one thing about this, we do get some questions around, oh, well, they were eligible, but the landlord just decided they weren't going to go with option 1 or option 2. So whatever reason, if you moved through the process and determined them to be eligible, and for some reason you did not cut a check on their behalf, then you would select denied, and 3 columns over is another column for the reason if denied. And that's a place where you could provide a brief explanation of why they were denied. And then moving over, this is where we see the age breakdowns. And I think the story at the top of my remarks is a useful explanation for why this information can become valuable. And then I'm just going to note that you will see 3 tabs, 3 additional tabs. Gabby's showing them now in the gray, black and white grayscale. These are tabs that are for DHCD's use only. They summarize and auto tally all of the information that you've inputted here in this first tab. I know one of the questions we often get is, why can't I copy and paste into this tab? And one of the reasons is that there's just so many formulas tying all of this together, including those 3 tabs that are for internal use here at DHCD. So I think that covers the spreadsheet. And so we'll move on to frequently asked questions on the next slide. And as Gabby is pulling that up, we talked about the first one is one that I've already touched on in this conversation, the unique household identifier. So again, not a number that we produce here at DHCD, one that we ask you to produce in your agency, but a commonly done with the initials and date of intake of a household. We get a lot of questions, and we're aware of the fact that collecting a W-9 and a taxpayer identification number are creating a real backlog in your systems and for the people needing help. We can talk more about this, but these items are required of us by the IRS, so we really don't have a lot of wiggle room in this department. If folks want to talk later when we get into some more Q&A, if folks have had success with how to speed up or make more efficient this step in the process, we would love to hear it, and your fellow grantees would too, I'm sure. Something that we want to clarify, RMRP funds can be used to pay for associated fines and fees, which I think is the language that we used in the guidelines, but want to be clear that that does not include utilities. So
there's a lot of confusion right now about what is included in rent. And we had an in-depth conversation on the webinar on Friday. We are reaching out to other states because where these funds are originated from, the CARES Act money, it's through the Treasury Department. They have not provided clear guidance as it relates to what's included in rent. And utilities is probably the most ambiguous area. So what we're doing now as we speak, we have consultants reaching out to determine just what can be included in the rent. We're learning that some states, and one of the things, Virginia, we were out in front setting up this rent and mortgage relief program. And so that's why a lot of questions weren't answered early on, and we're providing answers as we go. And forgive me, Senta, for hijacking your discussion here, your slide, but before we get into any more confusion, we will be conveying to you a clear policy on what can be included in the rent. We are told that there's some folks who, lawyers have read this and believe that in the lease, if it's included in the rent, it is considered all part of the rent. We're trying to get clarification, especially as it relates to utilities. We recognize that a lot of households, you pay their rent, not their utilities. If they can't pay their utilities, then they very well could get evicted. So we're getting some legal guidance here related to fees, and that also includes mortgage. We do know you cannot, when you pay someone's mortgage payment, you cannot include their property tax or their homeowner's insurance. Some homeowners, when they close on their home and they develop their agreement with the lender, they roll their homeowner's insurance and their real estate taxes, property tax, into their payment. We know, because Treasury did come out with guidance, that you cannot pay for those costs. There's one other insurance, this private insurance, PMI, that we believe can be included. Again, we're going to come out with guidance that's clear. It'll be in writing for you. What we're trying to avoid, of course, authorizing any type of inclusion in these payments that on the back end, the federal government will say they're not authorized. But as long as we get some guidance from those that are working with us, then we feel comfortable moving ahead and providing you all clear guidance as it relates to what can be included in the rent or mortgage payment. So sorry about that, Senna.
No, I appreciate it, Pam. Thanks for pausing to talk about that. So I mentioned this before, but with my notes in front of me, let me just once again define what we mean. So to count a household as approved would mean that your organization has cut a check or requested that a check be cut. And any approved household should always have a corresponding expenditure. And then the pending households are those who have been determined to be eligible for RMRP, but you're still in the process of collecting the documentation and you have not yet requested a check to be cut on their behalf. Another common question we have had is, do I need to submit a new spreadsheet with each reporting period? The answer is yes. Each report should be submitted in a new spreadsheet with numbers for the previous 2 weeks only. Please do not send data on a cumulative basis. That makes it much harder for us to process things on our end. The next slide is about the federal moratorium on evictions. And Nichelle, if you're on the call, I think this was a slide that you were going to lead on.
Sure. So the federal moratorium on publicly subsidized housing ended this past Saturday. And so what that means is in 30 days, folks can actually start being put out of their units. That will be August 23rd. And so for RMRP, and many of you who are already grantees from our Virginia Homeless Solutions Program and some of our other programs understand that for RMRP is the same as those ones. Rent arrears can be paid because rent arrears is not considered a duplicate payment. So if you think about it, someone in subsidized housing receives like a voucher to help them pay for their housing. But once they become past due, that is no longer considered rental assistance. It's considered rental arrears. And you are able to use your RMRP money to pay arrears for persons who fall into that publicly subsidized housing category. You just can't pay going forward. And I will gladly chat with anybody about this. Again, just try to put in your minds that it is not the same category once it's past due. And also the mortgage forbearance period has been extended to August 31st. So folks who were covered under mortgage forbearance are still covered until the end of August.
Thank you, Nichelle.
You're welcome.
I think the next slide is and we're moving a little faster today than we were on Friday, Pam. So the next slide is means it's time for us to open this up for some Q&A. And
Yes, yeah, we have a few questions, so I'll facilitate this part, Senta, Nichelle, and team. So Anthony asked, when you mentioned that pending means that someone is eligible, but you still need documentation, meaning that they seem to be eligible from self-reported information, correct? Actually, what this means is that there's some documentation that we need in hand, such as the W-9 from the landlord. So we want you to count that household as eligible, but pending at the moment. We do not want you to count a household as approved until they are deemed eligible and you have all the documentation and you've either sent the check or the check, you've made a request to have the check sent. That's the approved. The next question, can you talk about how to report when an application changes from pending to either approved or denied from one reporting period to the next? Does that household get counted twice? As long as you do not count that, put that household in the same reporting period in approved and pending. They need to be one or the other. So let me walk you through an example. So let's say the Smith household comes, you deem them eligible. However, you've submitted the request to the landlord to get the W-9. By the time it's time for the reporting, you still don't have the W-9. You need to count the Smith household in pending. Then the next reporting period, you get the W-9. That means the Smith family then becomes approved because now you can either send the check or request the check. So the Smith family then moves from pending to approved. Now let's say that the Smith family was in pending, you're awaiting documentation from the landlord notifies you, sorry, we're not going to participate, not going to agree to either option, not sending in my W-9. That means the Smith family will not have access to this program. Therefore, they move from pending to denied, and then you put in the column where reason for denial, landlord refused to participate. So that way, and you're using the same unique identifier for each family. So we can track that family from reporting period to reporting period. And that way they don't get counted twice for one reporting period, but we can track them through the process. So I hope that answered that question. Can you define what it means to be determined eligible, but you don't have documentation for them? So if you don't have documentation, the critical documentation that we need is either a lease or some sort of communication between landlord and tenant, that there is that relationship that's described in the guidelines. We also need to have some form of income verification, paycheck stub, information of their unemployment insurance, and then of course we need the W-9 if it's a renting situation. So all of that information, they're eligible, but if you don't have documentation from the landlord that there's this relationship between the landlord and the tenant, like the lease or the written communication between, you don't have the W-9, then that means you don't have the documentation needed to approve the household. I hope that was clear. If someone is pending in one report period and still pending in the next, should they appear on both reports? Yes. Keep them, I believe so. I'm looking at my team. Yes, we decided, because that was a good question from last week. We decided to keep them, right, Michelle? Senta?
Yep, that's right. Yeah, because they would still be pending until they're either denied or
Approved.
approved, they're pending.
And the date column would help to clear up the confusion, that new date column.
Right, that's right.
And it also helps us see how long it's taking to move for folks to be able to move through the process. So it's good for us to know if someone's stuck in a pending status for 3 weeks.
Yep. So Nichelle, Margaret would like you to go through one more time about the arrears for public housing.
Sure. So, all right, I'll do real examples because I do way better with that than just, So you have Joe's in public housing. He has not paid his rent for April, May, or June. Joe comes to you. Joe in June finally went to his landlord and said, hey, I can't afford this. So they adjusted his amount of subsidy. And so he's in public housing. So for July, he pays just $30 compared to the $150 he had to pay for April, May, and June. That should happen in the beginning, but we all know life is life. Folks may not go to their landlord when they're first in trouble. So for April, May, and June, Joe now owes $450 in arrears. That is not current rent that Joe owes. That's arrears. Current rent, Joe's good. But if Joe doesn't pay those arrears, he will be out. And so RMRP can come in and assist with paying those rent arrears because it is no longer considered a subsidy. It's considered rent arrears once it's past due, his portion. And so people sometimes get confused because in April, it was a subsidy that he was receiving and his portion was $150. The second he became behind in it, it's no longer his portion of a subsidy. It is rent arrears. And that's based on HUD documentation, just so you know, because this money comes from the Department of Treasury. So as you can imagine, Treasury doesn't have a whole lot of rules around it, but we have to have a starting point for rules. HUD is the housing agency, and so we're using our HUD information. When HUD comes out to monitor, they actually consider rent arrears a different cost category. So your cost category is going to be rent assistance. Rent arrears is not the same in terms of looking at subsidized housing. Hopefully that cleared it up. Again, just remember, if they didn't pay it, it's arrears.
Thank you.
No problem. Did somebody ask me to repeat it again, or was that it? Yeah.
That was it.
Okay, cool, good stuff.
Okay. So next question, if a tenant has late fees, are these covered under RMRP? Yes, they are covered. And the landlord has to agree that if he or she forgives like the 50-50, the option one, they also agree that those late fees that they are forgiving are included in the rent. So RMRP funds do cover late fees. Allowing for self-certification doesn't negate the requirement for documentation from applicant tenant. That is correct, Sharvala. What self-certification we focused on in the guidelines is that it's COVID, their loss of employment was COVID related. It's been so much time since many people have worked, they may not be able to access documentation from their former employer about loss of their job due to COVID. So that part is self-certified. But if they have anything related, a previous paycheck and now they're not getting as much money because of COVID, that can be documented. So we, do try to get documentation. We do need documentation that they meet. They're at 80% or below AMI. We do need to have that documentation. But they can self-certify as to why, that they lost their job due to COVID. All right, in a recent email, there was notice that the report cycle would be accepted by close of business on the date due. Can you all consider changing this for future reporting cycles? Our data must go through Wednesday at 6, okay? Since this report requires a significant amount of manual data entry and cannot cut and paste, would it be helpful? It would be helpful if it's not due by 12 p.m. the next day. So in other words, right now it's due 12 p.m., 12 noon on Thursday. Would extending the deadline to close of business on Thursday help, Charisse?
Pam, I'm not sure if you can see, but folks are responding by chat saying yes.
Okay, thank you. I didn't scroll down. I was looking up at the questions. Thank you. Okay. So, the reason we have these deadlines, we've gotten deadlines ourselves so we can report this information onto the governor's office. And so we'll chat. Gabby, you're the one crunching the numbers. If everyone could, do it as soon as they can, but no later than close of business on Thursday, that would give Gabby Friday to work on, compiling everything. When the reports don't come in by close of business or by the deadline, then Gabby has to follow up and reach out to you. So but if you can get it in by noon, that would be great. But understanding that everything closes at 6 the night before, that doesn't give you much time. So I totally understand that. Let's see. Were there any other questions? All right, so I think those are all the questions right now. So one of the areas, again, we want to thank you for your patience while we work through some of the ambiguity that we're getting related to these funds. We understand the challenges the spreadsheet makes. We are wanting to make sure that we're reporting consistent data. So, there were some frustrations that some of the cells or the columns were locked. We have to keep those locked to ensure that each column, everyone's reporting the same information. As many of you have already found, Gabby is great to work with. So if you have questions as you go through your reporting, please reach out to Gabby. We know this particular report is going to be a crunch because this is a new spreadsheet, or at least some new information. We moved the expenditure piece. Last time you reported, the expenditure piece was on a second tab. We moved it to the front page to make sure everything was on one page and you didn't have to remember to go to a second tab. So Christine writes, if we have individual scenarios for a household that are unique or seem to be judgment calls, should we continue to reach out to CENTA for verification that our decision is appropriate? Yes, please do. We are trying to build our own capacity internally, thanks to Nichelle, Kendall, and their team for standing this up. We now have CENTA, Gabby, and Jessica, but we're going to need to bring on additional part-time people to assist, who will be assigned to you all, so you'll have access to CENTA for the big questions, and then technical support. You'll have some ongoing staff. The homeless and special needs housing team is a great model of a program that provides that hands-on support to grantees, and we want to emulate that with this program. Just didn't really have time to get all that done before we launched. We're glad this was helpful, and please do reach out with additional questions. You see the contact information for our 3 team members. So anything related to the rent and mortgage relief program, please refer to this team specifically. CENTA is there to answer questions about, just what was described a few minutes ago, unique situations with households. We're trying to take those one at a time and then be consistent with our responses. So CENTA is keeping a running tab of frequently asked questions. Gabby, as mentioned, she's in charge of the reporting, and so and her role will expand, but want to just get her focused on the reporting till we get that down. And then, of course, Jessica, as we talked about, she's doing some background work for us. So it doesn't look like we have other questions. We will follow up. Number 1, we'll send a copy of this PowerPoint, so you'll have it. And then number 2, we're going to send you more clarity on what can be included in the rent payments, what types of other fees, and if indeed utilities are going to be allowed. So we will follow up. If you've already covered that, we're not going to ask you to give money or take money away. We're just going to start with a clean slate. We do want to bring your attention, though, please do make sure all of your team members understand the option 1 and option 2. Early on, a couple of the grantees misunderstood option 1, which created spending or providing more money than was really allowed. But from this point on, please make sure your team members understand the difference between the 2 options. We do expect that requests for mortgage assistance will start picking up, as Nichelle mentioned, towards the end of August and September, into September, because of the federal protections will be lifted. The forbearance period for mortgages will be lifted, as far as we know, at the end of August. The last thing I want to mention is that one of the reasons this reporting is so rigorous every other week is that we need to stay on top of how much money you're spending and the need, so that we can share that with the governor's office, as well as other possible funding streams to bring in additional money. Right now, all we have is 50 million. We know that won't last long. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important. And speaking of your expenditures, when you start getting to the point of being about 50% of your amount, you need to make sure you go into CAMS, and you need to be doing that anyway, but you need to alert us that, hey, it looks like we're getting close to 50%, so we can allocate additional money. We do have more money. We did not allocate the entire 50 million at the beginning. We provided 10 million, divided it up among grantees so you could get started. So there is more money, but you need to give us enough head start to get the money to you, and then we can also convey how the spending rate is going for this program. So I want to thank you again for everything you're doing for this program. You've got a great team here at DHCD eager to help. Sent, I don't know if you have any closing remarks.
I don't, other than to just echo Pam's gratitude. We know that we have asked a lot of you, and I just can't express to you how important the work you're doing is. In the middle of a pandemic, keeping people housed is literally saving lives. So I just want to thank you all for that, and hope that you understand the importance and value that you offer us and to all of your communities.
Thanks, Senta. You all take care. Stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.